Welcome everyone, it's great to see so many of you here. My name is Paul Hobson, I'm the director of Modus, Oxford. I recognise lots of familiar faces, so welcome. And a very warm welcome to a distinguished panel of artists. I'd like to thank all the artists for coming to Oxford this evening. Some of you, I think, will have been on the tour of the Westgate to see the works that have been commissioned. And thank you for your interest in the programme. I'd also like to welcome Vivian Lovell and also Copy Muir of Modus Operandi. They were the agencies that were commissioned by the Westgate Alliance to deliver this programme, and it's great to have them here to set the scene. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you hear a fire drill, it is a real drill. We're not just trying to keep you awake. The nearest fire exit is behind the wall that we're just building, which may not feel very helpful in the context of a fire strategy, but you just go directly down the stairs where you would have come up. If for any reason that's blocked, then we will take you through this door here, which is usually not open. So I'm really hoping there isn't a fire, but just in case there is, that will be the fire exit route. We are recording this conversation, and if any of you have your mobiles, perhaps you could turn them onto silent. That would be appreciated. So, following this welcome, I'm going to introduce Vivian Lovell to set the scene on the aspirations for the Art at Westgate commissioning programme, and then there'll be short presentations by each of the artists for about 10 minutes long, and those will run between about 4:45 and 5:15. And then we're going to have a panel discussion about art in the public space. Public art in the public realms, got so many different names. We might talk a bit about what that means in the present political climate, or certainly something that I'm interested to talk about. So it's my pleasure to introduce Vivian Lovell, who's the director of Modus Operandi, and who will tell us about the framework in which this commissioning project was developed.
First of all, thank you very much to Paul and Modern Art Oxford for hosting this event. And very big thanks to my colleagues, Poppy Muir and Catherine Standing, who worked really closely with me on the whole development of the project. It's actually 4 years, just over, since we won a tender issued by Westgate. Westgate itself as an organisation is an amalgam of land securities and the Crown Estate, and they joined forces to develop the Westgate Centre. So we as consultants bid the project. We developed then, over the following 10 months, an art strategy, an art plan as we called it, which looked at the whole gamut of potential locations on site. We developed themes, we developed starting points for artists to consider, and of those, obviously we reflected the shopping centre's aspirations for vitality, abundance, etc., but more interesting for artists, we found that subjects such as light and archaeology were really coming to the fore. So, for those of you who weren't on the tour, just to recap briefly, in the art plan, we identified a number of locations, a number more than have actually resulted in the commissions that we saw today. And we had to work with a very strict budget. We assembled an art panel, and there were representatives from the clients, from the architects, from the archaeology department, from the city, and from the county, and Paul from Modern Art Oxford. So there were a wide range of stakeholders represented in the selection processes for the artists. And of the 5 permanent works, all of them were competitive, invited competitions, with the exception of Daniela Schonbuhler's Lantern Oculus, which was a direct invitation to Daniela to collaborate with the architect Jeremy Dixon of Dixon Jones, which followed on from an extremely successful collaboration they carried out in London for Wilder Walk for the Crown Estate 2 or 3 years beforehand. and all the rest were invited to competitions. We also commissioned 2 artists for temporary work. Adam Dant, who imagined Westgate as the centre of a notional meridian, a cultural meridian for Oxford, and created a wonderful series of maps and artworks and other plans that children engage with for the hoardings that were temporarily on site whilst the building work was being carried out. And the other artist was Rachel Barbaressi, who's an Oxford-based artist, and she worked on a reminiscence project around St Ebbs and worked closely with the Oxford City Council reminiscence officer, engaging particularly elders in what it had been like to live in this quarter of the city before it became this developed. So how do we approach this? So it's a question of questioning whether art could coexist with retail. And of the 40 years, staggering 40 years I've been organising public art commissions, I've worked in universities, schools, hospitals, cities, convention centres, churches, etc., but never, as it happens, in a shopping centre before. So I was fascinated to see how we would do and how artists would cope with the challenges and the issues. So some things I hope we'll address later. What are the strategies that artists employ for bringing their work to public attention in such a competing environment? And are there compromises? Well, those of you who've been on the tour, we can raise those questions. And is a retail environment, is it an opportunity or a threat? This one is engaging very much with a non-art audience for the most part. Public art is by definition art that you haven't chosen to see. You don't cross the threshold of a gallery, even one as welcoming as this one, or a museum. So there are different tactics that have to be employed that some of the artists started to talk about today. And that's really all I'd like to say this morning before I hand over to the artists and back to you all.
Great, thank you very much. So we're now going to have a series of short presentations by the artists, and we're beginning with David Batchelor. For over 25 years, David Batchelor has been concerned with our experience of colour within the modern urban environment. His work comprises 3-dimensional works, installations, drawings, paintings, photographs and animations. He's also written a number of books and essays on colour, including Chromophobia in 2000 and also The Luminous and the Grey in 2014. David studied fine art at Trent Polytechnic, Nottingham in 1978 and cultural studies at the Centre of Contemporary Cultural Studies at the University of Birmingham in 1980. He was born in Dundee and lives and works in London, and his artwork, Homage to Dr. Mirabilis, commissioned for Art at the Westgate programme, is located in Leiden Square, adjacent to John Lewis. David, over to you.
Thank you very much to everyone for organising not just this event, but the whole project, which has been ongoing now for, well, as you said, at least 4 years. And sometimes it feels like longer. We don't have very long, so I'm just going to briefly try to introduce the thinking that was behind the project that we've developed for that bit of space in front of John Lewis. It's called Homage to Dr. Mirabilis, and Dr. Mirabilis was otherwise known as Roger Bacon, the friar of Greyfriars, a brilliant medieval thinker, philosopher, mathematician, early astronomer, and apparently an early linguist. The part of Westgate is essentially on the site of Greyfriars Friary. So my starting point was Roger Bacon, somehow. Fortunately for me, Roger Bacon has a statue in the Natural History Museum in Oxford, that rather astonishing building and collection. And Roger Bacon is standing there holding a spherical astrolabe or armillary sphere, And I don't know much about astrolabes. I certainly didn't when I began looking at Bacon's work. But they are these phenomenally interesting objects which are, well, I said they kind of feel like they were the smartphones of their day. They were, this is a detail of, I mean, trying to carve an astrolabe out of not very good stone is obviously rather difficult. So it's a very crude version of them. But astrolabes occur from the 3rd century BCE in Greece, Byzantium, Syria, England, China, India. So they are literally a global phenomenon of almost a 2,000-year period. They were sort of killed by lenses, by telescopes, essentially, which would allow one a different way of measuring our place within the firmament. But astrolabes could be used for as compasses, as astronomical and as astrological devices, and as sort of sat-navs of their day. So they seem remarkably broad and universal and interesting in their own right. And Oxford has, the Science Museum in Oxford has the best collection of early astrolabes, which were a gift of, I don't remember who from. This is one actually from the Maritime Museum, an extraordinarily beautiful timber astrolabe, obviously used on a ship. And it was this is from the Oxford, from the Science Museum in Oxford, as is this. And then there are these remarkably beautiful, and again, international series of two-dimensional representations of astrolabes, presumably a French one here in the centre, an armillary sphere, with sundry classical figures sort of hanging around. A beautiful Arabic one, and another probably Persian, and I'm not sure in this case. So there are so many of these, this source material for me. And the great pleasure for me is that I've always been interested in geometry and off-geometry and abstraction, and through that also with colour. So this provided the basic material for me to work with to try to generate some version of an astrolabe de nos jours, so to speak. And I just began making a lot of drawings literally taken from the figures, mainly the two-dimensional images that I'd seen, none of which I'd properly understood. It's important that you know that. And from these drawings, we then developed. The drawings bit is the real pleasure bit for me, and it's the interesting bit, and it's the bit you begin with. It's the way it's trying to organise your research and observations and thinking, and then that's what I presented when we were proposing this, and then you turn this thing into something else, and in this case, from an A3 drawing to I think it's a 7.5 metre high, 3.5 ton. Series of intersecting stainless steel bands, each inlaid in their channels with rather beautiful neon tubing. Now, the one thing that I couldn't know, in spite of all the reading and the research and the tests that we did in the studio and elsewhere, the one thing I couldn't know really was what it was going to look like when it was switched on about a month ago. So all this fine talk about research and Roger Bacon and Dr. Mirabilis and astrolabes and armillary spheres, it's fine, but in the end what counts is if it works in the space, and that's the one thing none of us could ever know before it happened. And this is it as it is currently constituted. And of course you hope, and you have experience that you hope that what you've planned and designed and the materials you're working with are going to generate something both that you have projected and you think it's going to. You also hope that it might have effects beyond that which you could possibly plan. And
at dusk when this was taken, I'm quite happy with the way the colours take over. That's the thing, you see. The structure is one thing, but what really matters is when the colours take over. And the effect of the colours is, of course, this is a 3.5-ton lump of stainless steel. My hope is that what the colours do is make it relatively weightless. Not only, and then of course, there's the complication of colours that I planned for this. There's also, in a way, the unexpected effects and so the added value is the reflections. These are the things you know it's going to happen, but you can have absolutely no way of really planning or anticipating that. And I have to say that it was an interesting journey because it wasn't without complications. And the bulk of this 3-year, there's 3 weeks at the beginning of this 3-year process where it's all the fun stuff, the drawings, the planning. There's 2.5 years of hanging around, as Charlie Watts used to say about drumming for the Rolling Stones. 2.5 years of stuff being done, meetings, planning, fixings, health and safety, pigeons, retail units and such like. And then there's another 3 weeks at the end where the thing gets installed and then it gets switched on. So out of this 3-year period, there's about 4 weeks, which is really exciting. And actually, then now the process is over, it's there, and I'm hugely relieved that it does what I hoped it was going to do, and maybe other things as well. I should probably stop there because I think I've probably done my 10.
David, thanks very much. The next artist that we're going to hear from is Rana Begum. Rana's practice draws inspiration from the abstract collisions of culture. I didn't write this, and it's just so. It's actually so beautiful when I read it. I'm like, it's almost as wonderful as the work. Draws inspiration from the abstract collision of colours, forms, and movement in contemporary urban environments. Begum finds fleeting moments of transcendence amongst the visual clamour and discord of journeying through a city, translating these ephemeral occurrences into works of art. Her sculptural compositions, with their repeating geometric patterns and vibrant hues, explore the reflections of light. They engage with the viewer by presenting changing symmetries and forms that, with each movement, create a new moment of alignment. Isn't that wonderful? I wish I had written that, actually. So it's almost as compelling as the work. Rana studied painting at Chelsea College of Art and Design in 1999, and the Slade School of Art in 2002. She was born in Bangladesh and lives and works in London, and her artwork, number 274 Reflectors, commissioned for art at the Westgate programme, is located at the Escalators in Middle Square.
It's been great kind of working on it and seeing it kind of come together. It's strange because I thought this was one of the going to be the most easiest public art project I work on, and actually it ended up being really complicated and quite stressful. You wouldn't think that when you look at it, but so I'm going to go through with some images and kind of to show you where it kind of began. This is a piece of work that I produced in my residency in Bangkok in 2006, and I think I produced about 3 works. I found these reflectors in a DIY store and absolutely fell in love with them because of their colour and the intensity and how it changes in the light, whether it's artificial or natural. And change is something that I really want to kind of embody in my work. My attention span isn't very great, and so I find that even within my own work, I need something that kind of constantly renews the attention, if you like. So when I got approached to, first of all, to propose something for Westgate, I had been working on a project at King's Cross, and for that project I proposed a piece with the reflectors, and I thought this is perfect timing. It was an opportunity to kind of revive this series of work and have the funding I needed to kind of invest, I guess. And then it kind of coincided with Westgate, and I thought this is brilliant because Oxford is kind of known for cycling and, this kind of idea of making a work that used a material that highlighted that, if you like, in a way. And I also knew that the site was quite awkward. When Vivian proposed the space, I was like, no, this is not, I can't really work. It wasn't a perfect square or a rectangle, and I thought this is going to be really difficult. But I like challenges, and I like, I don't like to say no until I've really explored all aspects of it. So when I looked at the space, I was thinking about kind of the busy environment, all the kind of things that are happening in the space and likely to happen. I wanted something that was organic, but at the same time had a structure to it as well. And these reflectors kind of, as you put them together, they have this kind of pixel effect as well. So I wanted to kind of embody this kind of digital kind of aspect, that isn't really in my work, but I felt it was kind of in the space a little bit. So this is kind of the initial drawing, and you can see in the drawing that where the kind of the diagonal line is going, that the reflectors are quite close to the escalators, and the reason was that I wanted something that was also quite tactile. I wanted something where people could actually put their hand on as well. That obviously is different because you've all been in the space, but there's certain rules and regulations in public art that you have to kind of work with, and it meant that I had to kind of push the artwork up, and I did fight quite hard, but I lost in that case. And then, I was also told that I was going to have a massive screen on the right-hand side as well. But it's worked out, But these are some of the challenges that, you have to kind of work with, and working with, Vivian and Poppy, who, completely kind of understand where the artists are coming from, really helps, basically. So I started off... I always make models because I can't actually draw very well. I can't do three-dimensional drawing, and I can't draw to explain what it is that I want to do, or how the materials will interact with the space or the light. So this is kind of the model I made for my presentation, and using a kind of similar kind of material which kind of explains a little bit how the light effect will work. So this is the end result, basically. And it's great when you, especially when there's kind of natural light kind of comes in, and when you're walking through, you don't necessarily need to really look at the work, kind of stand in front of it. I love how, you can walk through a space and kind of see things shift and change. What I hadn't anticipated was Superdry being right at the top, but I think it works, it stands, and I think that's the whole thing. I like the idea that, a lot of my inspiration comes from, clashes of colours that you experience when you're walking through a street or a busy space. So it's nice to be able to kind of throw something back and create a kind of a moment where it just allows you just to kind of breathe, if you like, and take this kind of calm state. And I don't know if people feel that, but that's it.
Thank you. Rana, thank you very much. The next artist that we'll hear from is William Cobbing, and William Cobbing's artworks encompass a diverse range of media, including sculpture, installation, performance, and video. Slapstick scenarios are created in which people are depicted immured in surrounding architecture, or buried under layers of earth or clay. The works allude to the idea of entropy, blurring the boundaries between body and landscape. Recent works include the imprint of text and images into ceramic surfaces, from words scored into wet clay, then effaced, to impressions of found images transformed through glazes. Williams studied fine art at Central St. Martin's in 1997 and at De Ateliers in Amsterdam in 2000, and was awarded a PhD Fine Art by Practice at Middlesex University in 2010, and he lives and works in London. Williams' artwork Paradise Gardens, which was commissioned for the Art at Westgate programme, is located in Greyfriars Place.
Thank you, Paul. Just like to start off by thanking Modern Art Oxford for arranging this event, and a really, really big thank you to Modus Operandi, to Vivian, Poppy and Catherine for being incredibly supportive and helpful for about the last 2.5 years since I've been working on this. When I was approached to make the proposal for Greyfriars, which those of you who've been on the tour have seen, it was very much made aware about its particular sort of site-specific quality and the history of, as you can see on this sort of map from 1450, the area around St Ebbs and Greyfriars Friary. And also from more recently, from around the 1850s, there was a market garden and orchard very nearby Greyfriars, and you still have roads and areas called Paradise Square, for example. So the title from the work comes from the nomenclature of the area. And Paradise also sort of meaning kind of meadow and having a kind of a more utilitarian sort of quality to it, sort of fixed in the actual history as well. So thinking about the friary and thinking about the archaeological excavation of the area in Greyfriars, which unearthed a lot of things like plant specimen that David was from the council was really helpful in terms of helping me kind of find out about. Thought a little bit about the sort of herbs and the plants that would have been effectively sort of used around the kind of 1450s as well, and found a wonderful book called sorry for this terrible German pronunciation, but Kleines Distiller book by Johann Groninger, who is a really sort of distinguished printer and publisher from Strasbourg. Here are some more images from the book. I was totally bowled over by the block prints of these plants and related them to something known as the Lacknunga remedies, which included the 9 herbs charm. So certain herbs have certain kind of chants and are kind of articulated in terms of their magic and their kind of healing properties. But they're also just wonderful poems as well. So you can see them. I don't know how well you can see them here. I mean, thinking about these as well, like these don't appear in the actual works, but I wanted to talk about them in the sense of them being really integral in terms of me thinking about the herbs and the plants that appear on the actual work. It may be, I've started having some ideas maybe about doing some kind of bit of experimental music or a choir or a recital or a spoken word event around the area, because it's quite sort of auditorium-like. The stones, if you've been around that area, form a kind of a crescent, and sort of acoustically that could be quite interesting. Thinking about some influences, you've got someone who I'm a great fan of, Julian Cope's Modern Antiquarian telly series, Derek Jarman's Journey to Avebury film, which is wonderful, and Lucy Lippard's book Overlay, and thinking about land artists like Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson. Also other works like Le Corbusier's Gravestone, which you can see here, and Peter Zumthor and Pete Udolph's Serpentine Pavilion. And contextualizing where I'm coming from with the work, imprinted ceramic works, imprinted book covers. So this is Lucy Lippard's Undermining, a work from a residency in Afghanistan at Turquoise Mountain called Bamiyan Mirror, where I placed a mirror in front of the Bamiyan Buddhas. and a work really close to this realised in this area when I was the Helen Chadwick Fellowship at the Ruskin School, and researched the myth of Gradiva, which became manhole covers, which I then installed in Camden Arts Centre and the Freud Museum after installing them in Pompeii. So moving on, some architectural renderings of the stones. So thinking about the planning stage, really interesting to hear what David was saying about, I mean, dozens of meetings that were all really helpful, but the process is quite slow, it's very meticulous, so this was part of the process. Here's the architectural renderings as well. I really like these kind of funky, kind of jewel-like stones that the architects rendered when we worked on these. These were really great. So, moving on, just really quickly talking about the process. This is the Landers Quarry in Purbeck on the Jurassic coast. So these are naturally occurring stones that we didn't quarry out, we just hauled them out of the ground. Assembled them in Purbeck, and then I worked at a ceramic studio in Düsseldorf to create imprints from the Johann Gröninger herbal images to print them into the clay. So it's a very direct process. So it went from scan of the 1450 document, laser cut print, and then into the clay. So it has digital process as well. This is the process of seeing the clay then move into the ceramic. And it was fired at a good friend of mine and also a very renowned sculptor, Marcus Castius in Düsseldorf, who just happens to have a mega kiln that he's inherited from the European Ceramic Centre. So that was really exciting. The works took 3 months to dry because they're about 45 millimetres thick, and to keep them flat really required a very sort of slow process. Here's the quarrying process and the stonemasonry that was done at Landers. The works were then installed by MTech. So again, going back to the sort of slowness, everything is really, really slow until the day of install. And it is like 4-ton boulders times 7 on the back of a truck being lifted by a crane into the ground. And it is scary as hell. And it's also, all the energy of the whole project is focused into about 4 or 5 hours. It's really extraordinary. Totally nerve-wracking, but really exciting as well. And this is how they look now in place. So this is, they've got crystal glazes on. So with Marcus, we worked really a lot on durable glazes that have a really reflective patination, which means when you walk around Greyfriars, depending on the time of the day, you have different reflections. So just here are the images.
So our next artist is Nicky Hirst. Nicky's known for her subtle and elegant works and often incorporating commonplace materials that are designed to draw attention to the idiosyncrasies and psychological dimensions of a given site or context, and where slight shifts of manipulation or juxtaposition alter meaning. She employs a wide range of media, which includes drawing, sculpture, print, etched glass, collage, text, and photography. Nicky studied fine art at Maidstone College of Art in 1985 and art and architecture at Ciad Canterbury in 1994, and she lives and works in London. And her artwork, Myriad, which was commissioned for art at the Westgate programme, is located at the foyer entrance to Oxford Central Library and the library's Castle Street windows.
I'd also like to start thanking Vivian, Poppy, and especially Catherine on this project. I have to read mine, otherwise I'll forget everything. But so this is a picture of the existing library built in 1973. So my project, my commission was slightly different in that it was for not a new space, for an existing space. And I immediately loved the library. I loved the concrete and the wood, which you can't see in this picture, but the sort of integrity of the space. And it's England's third most used library, and it's got over 500,000 items available for loan. And when I when I was commissioned, I made a proposal, which was a curtain and the curtain was the way I saw libraries was that they were full of books and they were full of stories and full of potential, and so I wanted this curtain to sort of like a theatre curtain, demonstrate that. And then the librarians, when I spoke with them, they said, oh no, libraries aren't about books so much anymore. Libraries are about all sorts of things, and they're about spaces where communities can get involved and people's lives can be enhanced, and a range of things happen, not just books. And so I got reading about this notion of a third space, which is a space which is really rare on the high street, which is a free space. It's a neutral space. People can come and go as they please, and they're accommodating and accessible. And when I visit the library now, I can see, there's a whole range. It's full, and there's a lot of different people using it and being very comfortable there. So I think it's hugely successful as a library. So I had to get rid of my preconceived ideas of what a library was. And one of the librarians, Shirley, when she said what they wanted for the building was they wanted views into the space, and they wanted something that would convey a sense of what the building is about. And then so researching and all these conversations and looking at the existing architecture, it got me thinking, and everything was being packed up at the time, and it got me thinking somehow about Mondrian and his artistic journey, because there was a lot of content, and I was having to think of a way. The commission was always for a vinyl on the glass, so trying to think of a way of maybe turning something figurative into something abstract, which Mondrian did incredibly well. And so he was always in my mind. So I made, actually I've got a few samples here. I had this little box of Pantone postcards, and so I started cutting up shapes and putting them together and making boxes, and made lots of just laying out shapes like this. Catherine might remember my shapes, kind of laying them out. And then through these shapes, then I started removing ones to make. It was kind of like making pathways through, making space for people, making space for thoughts and journeys. And I was thinking about this hexagon framework, this motif being not only a response to the existing architecture, but referencing a hive and notions of economy and efficiency and busyness and beauty. Yeah, taking away, revealing pathways, and every single colour. When we started making, I worked with a designer on the computer. Every single colour is different, and there's different types of opacity. So when I made it on the screen, I kind of filled in the whole screen and then took away. That's the only way I could think of building it. And these are some colour samples. So unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it all filled in because we didn't sort of do a screenshot or anything. So that was all filled, and then just taking away. And there's these sort of there's boxes, there's stairs, for me there's open books, there's chairs, and there's pathways and routes. So yeah, something I wrote at the time describing the work was the unfolding and playful flip-flapping of boxes offer variations of pattern and growth. The artwork also strikes me as being celebratory, which is something the librarians really, really wanted. The many-coloured facets resembling ticker tape. Through the evolution of Myriad, I was always thinking about choices, inside and outside, up and down, opening and closing. Occasional areas are mirrored. There's only one or two at the entrance, so you just get that sort of reflection. And again, like other artists have referred to, there's an awful lot to contend with at that point. And I really enjoyed the collision and the reflection and the sort of in and out, and the artwork, it was important that it worked both ways, internally and externally. So we didn't go in the library today, but lots of you I'm sure have been in, but this is when you go up the stairs, this is looking out of the upstairs part of the entrance. These are the Castle Street windows, which initially were going to have a lot more vinyl on, but light is a big issue within the library because it's quite a deep space building, so some of the vinyl was removed. So that's looking out. And when I went to take photographs, this is actually a photographer's picture when the library was empty, but I went thinking I wanted to take some photographs the other day, and the library was so full and so used I couldn't actually take any, which was great. And then this is it doing its thing in reflection to its context. And I was also really pleased when I returned to see that they'd, once the artwork had been installed and the library was open, they'd used a similar kind of motif to lead people through the building as a wayfinding device. So in a way, the artwork had then further affected something else that happens in the building, which I really enjoyed that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicky.
Thank you.
The last artist that we'll be hearing from is Daniela Schonbuhler. Daniela works across various quite wide artistic disciplines, including installation, sculpture, photography and painting. Besides numerous solo and group exhibitions in Switzerland and abroad, a large part of her creative work takes the form of permanent public art installations and also architectural projects. After training as an architect in Switzerland and Paris, followed by a period with Mario Botta's architectural studio in Lugano, Daniela's interest increasingly turned to the visual arts. Architecture and related themes, however, continue to be of significant interest to her and influence and characterize her work from a conceptual point of view. And Daniela's artworks, actually there are two artworks that were commissioned for the Art at the Westgate programme, Lantern and Oculus, which are on the front of the building and also on the top corner, beacon work. So Daniela, over to you.
I did a collaboration with Dixon Jones Architects in London 2011, which was very successful. So Sir Jeremy Dixon invited me to make a proposal for this beautiful project in Oxford. Normally when I work site-specific, I really like to go on sites, and also at that time we was for several days in Oxford with my partner. And we looking and studied the place and the areas there. Because the task was that Jeremy built there a tower, which I could, on the top of the tower, do an intervention, and that should be with glass and light, etc. And so when I was in Oxford, I studied light and the position of the situation of the artwork. So quite quickly I understand that this beautiful place to do an intervention there, because it will be seen from everywhere, from New Road, Queen Street, Bond Square, Castle Street. And also with my assistant Sophie Smith, she's here today, also we studied the history of Westgate, which I think is always important for me also a bit to know when I work in a context which I was not known so much, what was Westgate and how old is it, etc. So back in my studio, I started with the first proposal, and I loved to do a project which takes the light from the sky and makes a connection with the street. I also studied Roger Bacon because he was so into reflection and refraction, and I thought that could be a really nice connection with Oxford. But I thought that it should be a bit more with the history of Oxford, because it was also important for me to find a link. So the Coddington Library, the windows there, inspired me to go on in the project, and I proposed 13 angle volume, which I made the first model, really little model, which I liked that I could take the light and that the model in itself perform with the sky and the sun. With this and the first rendering, I get to London and I present this to the architects because we collaborate quite close. And they supported me and so that is a beautiful project. So we need to present that to the client and also to the town, because it was quite an intervention on the sky, on the important skyline of Oxford. Then I started to do a model, which is always, like Rana says, very important for us, I think, to have a model. I do it in the scale 110. And in this model, I really took everything as it would be in the original piece at the end. So I decided the colors and the different texture of the glasses. And also the position was very important, that every piece of glass has the right position, also the transparent glasses. And then I had the model, and we was ready to go to the presentation. But I thought it is quite difficult when I do a presentation in a room which is closed. It's absolutely not that what it will be, because this project will be in the top of a tower, playing with the sky and the light. So we did from the model a film, which I think was very important for our presentations, to get the client to understand that this piece change always depends on how the sky and the sun interfere. I do this a bit quicker because we have not so much time, but you can see that also, for example, in evenings, the lantern always take the colors of the sky into it. Because the glasses, they are also special and take all these colors on. Then we had to do the renderings, 3D, and the client thought that on this wall we have this big oculus, which without nothing is a bit empty. And they proposed me to do, proposing that it can be, the lantern and the oculus could be in a discourse. So I started to think about it, and I thought there could be a glass curtain behind the oculus. It was important that for the architect also that you can still feel the bigness of the wall, the thickness of the wall. And we had different workshops, and then at the end we decided to do a flat version. But I take over the same glasses and same coloring as at Lantern. Because it was also important that the oculus, which is 5.20 meters in diameter, which is quite a big piece also to producing the glasses, takes not over the importance from the lantern. So it needs to be in a certain dialogue between them. Then after the presentation to the town and the client, we had okay to start. And then we get into the quite difficult moment. So we had to collaborate with an engineer, of course, because it's outdoor, because there's wind up there. So we had Tim McFarlane, which is an engineer from London, specialized in glass, which was really important to have him on board, because I love to do a structure that is very thin, and he was so great to do that collaboration. Then I had to build a mock-up in Newcastle, where the metal workers were from. And then we had also built a mock-up in Switzerland, because with the glass and the light for the evening, we worked on it in Switzerland, we produced it in Switzerland, and the metal and structure work was produced in Newcastle. Then we started to producing all the glasses, and it was very important that everything was packed really right, every numbering perfectly. Perhaps on site we had not so much time, so boxes ready to ship to the UK. At the same time, in the UK, they built the structure from stainless steel, and they did really nice work, really sharp, perfect. And then sometimes I get to Oxford on the site, and when I did this shoot, I was sure that Lantern will be working up there. Because if you see the light up and the darkness down, or the shadows down, I imagined the lantern up there, and I was sure that it would be, my idea was okay. Then I had Tomoko Nakagawa. She is a photographer, and she always was with us when we did the production, and she did the time-lapse film of the production and installation on site. She's here also. And so to let you see, it was a really good planning from my people and also the site people to really collaborate on this installation, because it was quite with big cranes and timing, etc. Everything should be working very fine, and I need to say it was without problems. We installed everything in a week. And then the day, with the crane, we put the whole lantern on the top. It's quite exciting. Because you never know with glass, the structure, but it works very well and quick. But of course, it needs to be a planning which is really, really well organized. Then first day in the evening, the lanterns start to perform up there, hopefully for some time now. For me as an artist, it was also very nice to see that our ideas and that everything was working as thought. And we had afterwards to think also about the night time, when the lantern in England, winter time is quite dark, so we make a light installation inside with a program, so the lantern has different, when you go out afterwards, this different lighting, is not always static. Was a programming directly on site with my light engineers. For me to end, it was really an interesting project, and it's interesting because I think the lantern works for herself. She works with the natural light. Depends what season you have. That is what daylight you have. This is, for example, in the morning when you come up from New Road, In the afternoon is completely different because the sun shines not through, shines directly on it. And I think for me public artwork like that works quite well because it's autonomous and people there not going to see an art, but perhaps they understand when they're walking by a day that is different than another day and they start to look at it. For me that was very important. Only to remember that was before, and then I think we did a good and interesting work, all of us, all the artists, to get to give a gift also, hopefully, to Oxford. And I like to thank you also, Vivian and Poppy. I like to thank you, Jerry and the Modern Art Oxford, Jerry Dixon Jones Architects. My collaborators, without them it was not possible. Partner, Tom, Sophie, all they are here. And also thank you to my friends, they are coming from far and from less far, but it's great to see you, and thank you very much.
Perhaps inevitably we have very little time for a wider discussion, so I'd just like to get a sense for how many of you in the audience might have questions for the panel at this stage, because I've got quite a few questions, and I'd be very happy to have a conversation with the artists, but I'm conscious that many of you may also have questions that you'd like to put directly to the artists. So does anyone have any questions at this stage, or not? No? Okay. Good. James.
It's a question for Nicky, actually, because you're drinking water, I'll get you. I was interested that you said you were happy that, in a sense, elements of your artwork had been borrowed and turned into public signage. And I thought that was very different to the attitude of a lot of other artists, perhaps, who would defend to the death the originality of their work or whatever, and not allow it to be used. I thought that was very interesting. I thought, was that something that arises out of working a lot on public art projects?
I hadn't thought of that as being different, but I think a lot of what I'm interested in is the real world and art, because they're kind of one and the same, but we see them differently maybe, and so it's that crossover that I really like. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I'm interested in the real world and art, but I do think they are one and the same, and so I think if art is properly integrated, then it will no doubt affect what's around it, and so I do really enjoy that kind of. And there was something about I really wanted the entrance to. Well, inevitably it was going to reflect everything around it, that it's glass, and so it does reflect. And so then to have a further reflection of it in a different form just seemed to make sense to me.
So it reminded me of the Gillian Wearing and her work was used in advertising.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. But also didn't Bob Dylan do it before Gillian Wearing? So, it's all kind of, where does it come from? What's real and what's art and what's... Yeah. Thank you.
Does anyone want to ask a question at this stage or not? Okay. Well, I'd like to ask all of the artists. I think we all have a sense, and we can probably imagine that there are a great number of challengers working in this context, and even Vivian, who's very experienced in working in a range of different contexts, in terms of commissioning, but actually maybe not in a retail context like this. So I'd just love to hear from the artists, less so about the challenges, because I'm sure that might not be very interesting for you to talk about in any case, but actually what the unique opportunities are for, as a practitioner, working in this context, working in public space, as opposed to distinct from working in a gallery environment, a more conventional environment. So perhaps we could I'd just be interested to hear you talk about that.
this idea that, I mean, especially with my work, it's really influenced by what I'm experiencing in the streets and outside. And I love this idea that I go back in the studio and use these photos that I take or inspirations that I have, and then to kind of put this, this back out, in the environment is really interesting, and then to see how it kind of is affected. I think for me, I don't really see it very differently to exhibiting in a gallery space, because the interaction I have is much more in a space like that. I like the way that people can really kind of touch it and can actually, especially with your work as well, the fact that they can actually go and touch it and look at it, get close to it. It's really interesting for me. And you can't have that, because you go into a gallery space, it's like, oh, can't touch, I take my kids, it's like, you know the rules. What are the 2 rules? Look but don't touch kind of things. So it's really, I love it, and I really enjoy working in that way, and we don't really get enough of that opportunity, really.
I agree. Many of the differences between just working in a studio and producing work for a gallery compared with something like this are practical differences. They're the ones about logistics and health and safety and engineering and such like. But I kind of get a bit resentful about some of that work. At the same time, the pleasure of being taken out of the studio is that you're taken out of the studio, and you stand to learn a lot from these encounters, with people, with different kinds of environments and so forth, and also, for me at least, probably for everyone, you're working on a different scale too. And if you're working on a different scale, you're making different work, and that can then feed, back into the studio. So they're different. There are differences, but they're not. You don't put a different hat on. You just have to adjust. You make adjustments, and hopefully those adjustments you make can take the work beyond itself, and then feed back into it.
I agree totally with but what Rana and David have both said, and also for me, when being invited to do a commission, the most exciting thing is like, what's it going to be? None of us in the room know, and it is definitely affected by the existing, and so what it's telling you. And I think that is very different from a white cube, from the white space. And personally, I find it just very rich, because I don't know, and it's nice not to know and to discover, rather than, I don't want to know anything for sure. Often, it's those sort of it's the not knowing that's the interesting bit, I think, if that makes sense.
I guess, following on from the idea of works being tactile, I suppose even the earlier works I made with the manhole covers, the idea is that they engage in a kind of liminal space. So you wouldn't... One nice thing about certain public artworks is you don't necessarily journey to see them. You just accidentally might pass them, so they sort of exist in a kind of in-between space. So people walk all over my manhole cover sculptures, which I'm really happy about. And then the tactile works, there's a different type of like a sort of tactile quality in Oxford, in the sense of people touch them. But also a lot of my work on the sculpture has been in sort of, after the work was installed, the stone part, but it was sort of open to the public. So I was putting in the ceramic tiles and grouting with assistants while it was open to the public. And so it's really funny. I was sort of observing how people react with it. So at lunchtime, people come and lean up against the boulders. And there was one woman who I think had her lunch break, and she was there with a packed lunch and a bottle of wine, and she sort of was leaning behind one of the boulders. And the next thing I knew, it was about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and she'd just fallen asleep. So there's the behind it. Also, just very quickly, the idea of entropy is important to me in the work. The idea that a work doesn't have to, in a gallery, it might be there for 5 weeks. A public artwork might be there for sort of years, hopefully, and over that time, it's going to be weathered, or certain works are going to be weathered, and I really hope mine will be.
I think it's similar because I think what is really interesting as an artist when you can do a public artwork is that you really can work site-specific and reach also everybody. I think sometimes the museum or gallery space, of course, is interesting because people there know you or the art going and having going to see it. But in a public space, you put something there and everybody can have a reaction to it, which I think that is a bit also the new or future thing about art for me. It's more that it should be interactive with everybody. And for that, I think public artworks are very important in our time.
Well, that leads me on to something that I wrestle with all the time, which is, running an institution like Modern Art Oxford, where we're really keen for everyone to feel that they can come in and have a relationship with art, which of course is a really complex thing to try to achieve. And of course, one of the claims that's made for art in public spaces, art in the public realm, is that it contributes or it achieves a kind of democratization of that invitation. And some of you have mentioned that, and Daniela, you just referred to that. And I'd be really, and you may not all want to actually comment on about this, but it seems to me to be quite, that's a really complex thing to try to achieve. And do you feel that perhaps art in the public space achieves that more easy? It has many, many practical and technical complications, and it has to exist in a very distracted, often not so engaged environment, say from in a gallery. But do you feel that it does achieve this value of being a democratic invitation to a very different range of publics? I know David's going to conspicuously not answer this question, but do any of you have a view about that?
No, you start. I'll say so.
They are difficult questions. In some ways, I'm not sure democratic is actually the right word, because there's nothing democratic about what I'm doing there. I'm imposing a work in a space, which people may or may not choose to spend time with, or pass by, or whatever, or avoid. So I don't think it's different, definitely, from a gallery space where people they make the choice to go in and study art in one way or another. I'm not sure it's more democratic for us to come into this kind of environment. It's definitely different. But also, Carl Andre, I remember having a show here many years ago. He said, adults often have a problem with my work, but children never do. And I find that to be sort of universally true. Incidentally, if you work with colour, then it's a shoo-in with kids at home. So I've never had any problem with that sort of assumed elitism of the gallery. I don't find that discussion happens very much. And I think galleries are fantastic spaces in the same way that libraries are for concentrated study. And the more sort of chaotic world outdoors are great spaces too, but in a different way. That's all.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
Well, naturally, I would say that the public realm is where it's at, as I've spent all my career working in it. But I have worked in galleries, and for me, public art is really part of a very long, millennium-long continuum, whereas galleries are merely a blip in that historical process. So whilst I love seeing work in galleries, I think it's the engagement with the public realm that keeps me fascinated by it, and I think what Modus Operandi does is to try to open up opportunities for artists to engage and make work which they wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. sometimes on a scale or in materials that they haven't worked in before, you know, as many of you have.
I think the other thing that I love about public art is that, you know, work is seen by so many different type of people. It's not, and it engages, it draws people in so much more than, you know, galleries or museums would. And I feel like in terms of the education that you have, then, you know, it's so much, you get so much more out of it. And I really enjoy seeing, especially like when I had the piece at Regent's Park as well, the interaction that I saw that people had with the work made it really so much more exciting and makes me want to do more outdoor works, and where I get people from all different backgrounds looking at it. Even if they don't understand it, there's something about that connection. It's much nicer than when you have works in galleries.
Actually, the only other thing I'd add to that is that there's not just galleries and public space. There are many levels of public spaces. There's libraries, there's parks, there are churches, there are museums. I mean, these are all, and there's private public spaces, of which I imagine Westgate is one. I presume it's not a public space, in fact, technically speaking. It's, so you know, there's a whole spectrum of different types of complex public and not so public spaces.
Just quickly to add to that, I think it's the sort of sense of seeing something accidentally, and also in the sense of it becoming part of your habit, your walking habit, a sort of psychogeographic response to an area. So whenever I come out of Liverpool Street, it's the Sarah. I'm not a big fan of the Maggie Hambling, Oscar Wilde work, which is around Trafalgar Square, but it's part of my route sometimes. So it's that sort of sense of kind of accidentally seeing something, and it's kind of ensconced in your memory, but in a very sort of habitual way, I suppose. You just sort of walk past and you notice these things, and that's really quite different to a gallery or museum.
Great. Well, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all the artists once again, and also Vivian. And we're going to invite you now to have drinks, which have been very generously provided by the Swiss Embassy. So I hope as many of you as possible will want to stay. And of course, you can speak to the artist directly. So thank you very much.